Oh yeah. Why do you need to see? Someone would say. Oh, can I hear myself? Mm. Yeah, but I hear myself. There we go. No, through my computer, but my computer was muted. It didn't make sense. All right. Welcome everybody. Today we're going to go over functions. I assume you guys have already gone over functions during the class. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Just type them in the chat because I want to actually physically hear you. Well, functions are very easy to declare and create. The reason you have functions is to clean up your code, to structure it, but also to compartmentalize your code. In Python, scopes are defined with indentations. And if you don't know what a scope is, the best way I can explain it is think of it as umbrellas. So if you have, actually, I guess I can draw on the board if there's like one of those things you draw with. Can you see this? Cool. It's far. Does this one work? Can you see me? Liddy. Nice. So basically, think of it as umbrellas. So if you, what's a good example? A computer. So at the top, can you see this? Is it big enough? So if you have the chassis of a computer at the top, that's the first umbrella. Under the chassis, you have, say, I don't know, a hard drive. And then on the next umbrella, you have the data that's stored on the hard drive. So if you look at this as the hierarchy, the chassis can access everything since it's inside. So like the hard drive and the data can be accessed by chassis, whereas the data is not a part of the bigger umbrellas, if that makes sense. So say hard drive can still access data because it's above it, but data, since it's under hard drive in the hierarchy, you won't be able to access. The same, where's the little, the same is true for Python, where in code, things that are created inside a function can't be accessed outside the function. So say you create a variable here called my variable. And in here, you put whatever you want, right? Hello. You will not be able to access this variable that's created inside the function called main if you try to outside it. So here I can access my variables. If I do print my variable, won't even show up my variable. And if I try to hover over it, it says my variable is not defined because it cannot access it as it is in under main. Now, how do you declare a function? As most of you already know from the course, fundamental programming, you write def or define, and then you give it a name. So main in my case is what I've called my variable or my function. That's usually the main function name that you choose. Most programs are going to have a main. That's where most of your code is, the main part of your code. In these parentheses, you can declare arguments that you want to pass the function, which we will get into a little later. So all in all, the way you call a function is by writing the name of the function, so main in this case. And since it is a function, you need to add parentheses to call it. If I now go ahead and run this, so we move. Right. So a function only runs if you call it. So if I don't put main in here, and I remove this print hello, and I run the code, let me, huh? Oh, if I do this, it won't. As you saw, well, I think the wrong code run. I can't see. Huh? So let's see. We run this, nothing happens since we don't call either the first function or the second one. So here, if I add main, what's going to happen is when I run the code, it's going to scan from top to bottom, see, oh, it's a function. So we don't run this until you call on the function. So here we call on main, and you see it prints hello world. Now, it didn't do anything that was in the print hello function since we didn't call it. So if I remove the main, and instead down here, I call print hello, which is the name of the function, as you can see here on line 11. Now, what will happen is since this input line is or has the same indentation as the function call, it will run before print hello. So in this case, it will ask you for an input, and then it'll run the function which has a bunch of print statements. So if we run the code, what we should expect is for it to ask, what is your name? And if you go ahead and enter your name and then press enter, it will then run line 17, which is print hello, and it will print this information. So it says, hello and welcome to this example program, yada, yada, welcome, and then again, the name. Now, have we changed this around a little bit? So we created the name variable in a function. We wouldn't just be able to call the function and expect it to print the name since it would be lost. So if we move over here, let's see. We're going to go over passing variables to a function. So again, we have the main function. We have a little print statement that says, hello and welcome to main function. We have an input that gets created inside of our main. And then we call our next function called name print. And here in the parentheses, as you can see, I've put the name of the variable that we want to pass, which is name. And when we call it, we also receive a variable in the function. So name here and name here. Now, something to take in mind is that the name that you are receiving as an argument does not have to be the same name as you pass. So technically, I could change this to cake. And if I just change that one to cake as well, it wouldn't matter. It's still passing the previous variable. Whatever value you're passing can, or the variable name can be overridden. So the value will stay the same no matter what. But for simplicity's sake, let's just revert it back. So here we assign the name that we passed to a variable called first name, and that way we can print it. So if we didn't pass anything, if we remove that from there, and then we also remove it from the argument, and you try to access name here, you can see that it can access. It says name is not defined since we created the name variable in the main function, which is outside the scope of the name print function. If we revert this like this, this as well. Now, if we run this, that's not what it's supposed to do. It is running the wrong thing. Oh, that's because I am stupid. Yeah. Explains a lot. There we go. It says, what is your name? If we pass it the name, then now can print welcome Kia. Any questions so far? And if so, ask them in the, huh? Well, yeah, type them in chat. But I can't see anything, so I assume no one has questions. All right, so moving on to returning variables or returning multiple variables or yeah, variables in general. So to return variables means that when you run a function and you want that function to pass a value of any sort back to the previous or the main function in that case, you use what's called a return statement. A return statement is something you have at the end of the code. It will also exit your current function. So if at any point in your code you have return, it will exit out of the function and return to the previous function that was running. So in this case, we have a print statement, and then we declare a variable a that's assigned an integer of 25. We then go ahead and print the variable just for clarity. And here is something where we call on the multiply function, but we assign the return value to two variables, so return one and return two. If we look in the multiply function, we see that it gets passed the variable a. We then declare another variable called multiple, which is just an integer two. And then we do a quick calculation. So we declare a variable called calculations, multiply a by multiple, so 25 times 2. And then we return both the multiple and the calculation. So when we return, we now return back to the main function. So line 62, we assign the two variables there, and then we continue on the next line. So the print in this case. So we will print return 1 and return 2. This will return multiple, so 2. It will print our multiple was 2, and our new value is 50 in this case. So if we run it, we should expect that. Cool. And it works as intended. So what it did was it passed 25 here. It ran the function. The function did its calculation and then returned the 2 that we declared in here. And it returned the calculation. So 50. Any questions? No? Cool. Simple. All right. I guess that's it for functions. Huh? That's it. I mean, yes, it gets more complicated and you can use them in more complex ways, but that's just the basics and a little bit more, I guess. Yeah, you want to call a main function and then the functions you want to run afterwards get started from main, but you want to have a you don't want to have code that's just sitting I guess outside of a function. You want to have a main function, simply put. Yeah. And then I guess the next subject is file handling, writing, reading, overriding. But to do this, you need to import a library. And it's very simple from OS, so from your operating system of choice, Linux, Mac, Windows. And then you import, well, not read, but we just want to import. To open a file or to read a file, we use, or to write to it, we use the open function. So in the same way where we called main earlier, like this, they're calling on open. It's a built-in function or method. We want to save whatever we open to variable 1. And so the first argument in the call is the name of the file. it's either going to be the name of the file that you're trying to read or the name of the file that you want to create. So in this case, file.txt. The second argument is also a string, and there's a couple different options. There is R, W, X, and then what's pickle? WB? No, byte read. PR, by right? True. There's a append. So the most common ones, or the ones you're gonna use for now, are R and W. Or right? Yeah, exactly. And so if you use the command R, it will open the file. If there is no file, it'll give you a file not found error. If you use W, it will either open and read to the file or write to the file, or if the file doesn't exist, it will create a file. So in this case, we can begin with a write, very simple. Say we don't have a file here, we delete this file, and we use variable one, and then we call a function write for writing the file. Let's comment these out for now. Like this. So now if we run this, the file doesn't exist. So you get error note 2, no such file or directory exists. Now, if you go ahead and change the R to W, and we decide to add some content to it, you run the code, and all of a sudden, now we have a file.txt, and if we open it, it has content in it. So inside the write, you put whatever content you want. Now, Python is smart enough to recognize if you want to add a list to the file, if you want to add a dictionary, you can basically technically write Python code for the file to then read and use later. This is going to be quite useful for some projects you're going to have in coming courses. But that's just something to keep in mind. So you're not limited to text and numbers. You can do basically whatever you want. And you can also save it in any sort of file format you want, as long as it's not a compiled form. And then the most important part is after you're done with whatever file it is you're working with, it's important to close it. This is both for security, but also just so you're not hogging up a bunch of memory. Files are pretty simple. There is two major ways to read from a file. There is read line that will read the line that you're at and print it, or if you want to print it. But let's see. So if we go ahead and print read line, which we named a variable. Oh, it's this one. There we go. Oh. Stop. What do you mean? Okay. You're right. Thank you. There we go. Yeah, it does. My file content. No, it's not. So if we add some content, and we run the read line, it will read the first line in the file that was opened. If you do this multiple times, it will then print the following. So if you have a new read line. Now there's an easier way where you can get your values back as a list, and then it will print it out. Now it will automatically add, what's its name? It will automatically add \n, which is a new line, to your print. So let's see. If we print read lines, which is the variable name, it will print content \n, so on. Now, there's an easy way to remove it, and that's using a for loop. So we went over this a couple weeks ago, I think. And so simple for loop, we create a variable x in this case, and we go in read lines. Now, since read lines is a list, we can go ahead and use the method called rstrip and then print it. We now add it to our list that we created called stripped, and then we print it. That's it. And if we do that, oh, sorry. As you can see, now it created a new list called, or not called the same thing, but it removes the new line symbols, which cleans up your return statement. It's gonna make your life much easier in general. I don't think there's anything else on files. And if you have any questions, ask them. You can always email us as well if there's any. The final thing to go over is error handling. And in Python, it's very simple. It's called, let's try catch in other languages. Python, for example, is try except. It works very simply. So if you're trying to run a piece of code, say in this case, we're trying to receive a number from the user, you can use a try except to make sure that the user doesn't enter a value that's going to make the program crash, essentially, or cause any security risks. So what you can do is, in this case, if remove the entire try catch, and we just declare a variable, ask for an input, and then we try to say, do a mathematical thing with it, so multiply. I don't know what times 3. So that's gonna work with strings too, like that. And then when we try to print the thing, that's now not a multiply, but anyway. If we enter something that's not a number, like cake, it's gonna crash because it's a string, and it was expecting an int because it's trying to multiply. The way we can fix this, that's for true, I guess, thing like that. The way we can fix it is by having a try catch. So the try will try to run the operation that you did, and what did I say? Oh, sorry. Yeah, try except, sorry. Here we go. So in this case, again, same variable number. We're trying to accept an int. And in this case, we have an exception. So if it tries to get an int, doesn't get an int, it will jump to the exception and do whatever you want it to do. In this case, print this is not an int. Now the else, what that does is if it runs this and then the exception doesn't happen, the else case runs. So it will print number. So in this case, if I run this and I enter here, which is not a number, it'll say this is not an int. But if you enter a number, it will print the number. Tom, anything else I should go over? And this is it. This is try except. Right. Right. Yeah. So I heard a lot of people make in the beginning, I mean, we did it too, is you put a whole chunk of your code in the try. Because what you can do is you can just, I mean, remove the else like this and remove the indentation, but now the print would run no matter what. So if I do that, it would run. What also happens is someone will put the print in the try. Now the issue with that is whether I get an issue or not, it's still gonna complain because so it says this is not an int and tries to print it, but can't because it's not an int. Now the issue with this is there's no error handling. You wouldn't find out whether something went wrong or not. Your only way would be to sit there and troubleshoot. That's why you have the else. There is another one called finally. Finally works in the same way as not indenting at all. It will run no matter what. So use finally if you have a piece of code that's supposed to run whether the what's called it will run whether the scenario that you throw at it passes or not. Quite simple. Wow, this class was much shorter than I thought, but that's it. That's all I had to go over. Yes, functions is a big topic and it can get much more complicated. But this is the basics. So if you run into any issues, just shoot us a message, email us, call us. We might pick up. Who knows? Yep. I'm gonna stop the recording. Stop sharing. Yeah.